Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Eagle Eye Apache. Today, I want to share with you a story about a woman who gave everything she had to save a town, and a town that thanked her by leaving her to die in the snow. This is the story of Allara Voss. They left her with blood on her sleeve, ice in her hair, and her dead husband's coat hanging from her shoulders like the last piece of a life that no longer existed. Not because she had killed anyone, not because she had done evil, but because she had failed to save everyone. And sometimes, in a frightened town, failure is enough to make a saint look like a sinner. For 6 years, Allara Voss had lived at the edge of Caldwell Crossing, a small frontier settlement pressed between pine woods, muddy wagon trails, and a river that looked harmless when the sun touched it just right. She was 29 years old. Though grief would soon make her look older, she had brown hair usually pinned in a careless knot, hands roughened by work, and eyes that had seen too many people suffer to believe in easy miracles. She was not a doctor by diploma. Out there, few people were, but Allara knew fever. She knew infection. She knew which roots could quiet pain, which leaves could bring down swelling, and which signs on a child's face meant the body was still fighting. She had learned from her mother, who had learned from her mother before her. It was not book knowledge. Though Allara owned 2 medical books with cracked spines and pages stained by candle wax, her real knowledge came from sick rooms, childbirth beds, battlefield wounds, and long nights when death sat in the corner and waited to see who would grow tired first. The people of Caldwell Crossing had once trusted her. They had knocked on her door in the middle of storms. They had brought her babies who would not nurse, husbands with broken ribs, mothers burning with fever, and children coughing so hard their lips turned pale. Allara had gone every time. She had delivered Jacob Pruitt's son on a spring night 6 years before, when the rain was coming down so hard it sounded like stones on the roof. She had held Mrs. Dawson's hand through 18 hours of labor. She had stitched Earl Dawson's shoulder after a saw kicked back at the mill. She had sat beside old Mrs. Frey until the woman took her last breath and her sons were too broken to remain in the room. That was who Allara had been to them. The woman they called when hope was thin. The woman they trusted when prayer was not enough. Then the children began to die. At first, it was only fever. A little girl named Maisie Boone woke one morning with her skin hot and dry, her stomach cramped tight, and her mouth too weak to ask for water. By sundown, 2 more children were sick. By the next morning, there were 7. Allara moved from house to house with her medicine bag pressed against her hip and exhaustion gathering beneath her eyes. She cooled foreheads with wet cloths. She brewed willow bark and bitterroot. She checked tongues, pulses, breathing, bellies. She asked what they had eaten, where they had played, what water they had drunk. The answers were never clear enough. Some children grew better, others grew still. By the end of the first week, 5 were buried. By the end of the second, 9 small graves stood behind the church, the dirt still loose and dark against the frozen ground. And grief did what grief often does when it cannot find justice. It went looking for someone to punish. Whispers began at the general store, then at the mill, then outside the church after Sunday service, when mothers stood with red eyes and fathers stared at the ground because if they looked at one another too long, they might break. She gave them medicine. Someone said, "My boy worsened after she came." Said another, "She carries that bag everywhere." Who knows what's inside it? Allara heard the whispers before anyone said the words to her face. She felt doors opening more slowly. She felt silence fall when she entered a room. She saw mothers take cups from her hands and hesitate before lifting them to their children's mouths. But still she went. Because the children were still sick. Because fear did not change the work. Because Allara had never known how to stop helping simply because people had stopped loving her. The night everything burned. She was sitting beside Jacob Pruitt's son. Little Samuel Pruitt was 7 years old. With dark lashes, thin wrists, and a fever that would not break, Jacob stood in the corner. Arms folded, jaw clenched so tight Allara could hear his teeth shift when he breathed. She had just dipped a cloth into cool water when the sound came from outside. Boots. Voices. Not the voices of neighbors coming to ask for help. The voices of people who had already decided what kind of story they were in. Jacob looked toward the window. He did not look surprised. Allara slowly rose. Then the first stone came through the glass. It struck the floorboards and rolled beneath the bed. Samuel whimpered. Outside. Someone shouted. "Bring her out." Another voice answered. "She poisoned our babies." Allara looked at Jacob. And in that moment, she understood that grief had eaten the man she once knew and left something colder standing in his place. "Jacob," she said softly, "you know me." His eyes filled with tears, but his voice was hard. "I knew my son too." The door burst open. Men crowded the room with lanterns, rope, and rage. Women stood behind them, weeping and pointing, as if pointing could make the truth less complicated. Earl Dawson called her a witch. Mrs. Frey, whose mother Allara had comforted in death, crossed herself and would not meet her eyes. Then Thomas came. He pushed through the back door, breathless, coat half-buttoned, his old chest wound already troubling him in the cold. "Allara," he said, "run." And she did. Not because she was guilty, because innocent women can still be hanged by guilty crowds. They ran through Caldwell Crossing while torches moved behind them like angry stars. They crossed the churchyard. They cut behind the mill. They heard glass breaking, wood cracking, people shouting her name as if it had become a curse. At the edge of town, Allara looked back once. Her house was burning. The bed she had shared with Thomas. The table he had built. Her mother's remedies. Her books. Her dried herbs. 6 years of healing. 6 years of service. 6 years of belonging. All of it went up in flame. Thomas pulled her into the trees. For 3 days, they walked. On the 4th, Thomas began to stumble. On the 5th, beside a frozen creek under a sky, the color of iron, he sat down in the snow like a man who had reached the end of a road only he could see. Allara dropped beside him and opened her medicine bag with shaking hands. "No," he whispered. "Don't, Allara. I can help you." He looked at her with tired, loving eyes. "Sit with me." "No, please." The world narrowed to his hand in hers. The white of his breath. The terrible quiet between heartbeats. And because Allara had spent her whole life fighting death, it took every ounce of courage she had left to stop fighting and simply hold him while he left her. She buried him with a camp axe and her bare hands. Then she put on his coat and walked north. By the time the storm found her, she had no food, no home, no husband, and no name that was safe to speak. Only the snow, only the wind. Only the memory of a town that had once called her healer and now called her monster. By the time Allara Voss found the line shack, she had stopped believing in rescue. That was the strange mercy of exhaustion. It took the sharp edges off hope. It made the mind smaller, simpler. One step, one breath, one more moment with the body still standing. The storm had come down from the mountains with teeth in it. It did not fall gently. It drove sideways through the pines, across the canyon trail, over the frozen wash, and into every opening in Thomas's old coat. Snow clung to Allara's lashes. Ice gathered in the loose strands of her hair. Her hands had gone past numb into something worse, something distant, as if they no longer belonged to her at all. She had eaten nothing since the morning before. Maybe the morning before that. Time had become difficult to trust. At first, she had followed the creek north because water meant direction, and direction meant survival. But the creek had vanished under a hard skin of ice, and the trail had disappeared beneath wind-blown snow. The land around her had changed from forest to broken canyon country. All dark stone, white drifts, and scattered juniper bent low by weather. Then, through the blowing snow, she saw the shape of a roof. It was not much. 4 walls, one of them leaning, a door hanging crooked from leather hinges, a chimney blackened by old smoke but cold now, a forgotten line shack, built by some ranch hand or stage company years earlier and then abandoned when the trail shifted or the country proved too hard to keep. To Allara, it looked like mercy. She pushed inside and nearly fell across the threshold. The shack smelled of dust, mouse droppings, old ashes, and dry rot. Wind slid through gaps in the wall. Snow had drifted in beneath the door and gathered in one corner like a pale animal curled against the boards. But it had a roof. It had walls. It had one corner where the wind did not reach with its full hand. Allara lowered herself there and pulled Thomas's coat tighter around her. She tried to remember the last thing he had said before his breathing changed. "Sit with me." She pressed her eyes shut. "No," she whispered, though there was no one left to hear it. She did not know how long she sat there. The cold had a way of turning minutes into rooms a person could get lost inside. Her head dipped once, twice. Her body wanted sleep with an urgency that felt almost holy. But Allara knew enough about cold to fear that kind of sleep. She had seen men smile before dying of it. So she forced her eyes open and stared at the broken door. That was when she heard the horse. Not clearly at first. Just a soft shift beneath the storm. A dull thud. Then another. Hooves moving carefully over frozen ground. Allara's body woke before her mind did. Fear found her again. Her fingers searched for the small knife in her medicine bag. Though her hand was shaking so badly, she could barely close it around the handle. The last time men had come for her, they had carried rope. They had carried torches. They had shouted her name as if it were something dirty. The horse stopped outside. A shadow crossed the broken doorway. Then a man stepped in carrying an armload of wood. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and covered in snow from hat brim to moccasin. A bow was slung over one shoulder. A rifle rested against his back. A knife sat at his belt. Plain and useful. His hair was black, tied back with a strip of leather, and his face had the weathered calm of a man who belonged to hard country because he had learned every inch of it the costly way. He stopped when he saw her. Allara tightened her grip on the knife. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The man's eyes moved over her, but not in the way other men had looked at her. Not with hunger, not with judgment, not even with surprise exactly. Assessment. That was what it was. He saw the blue edge around her lips, the wet coat, the blood dried on her sleeve, the swollen stiffness in her hands, the way she held the knife like a woman who had very little strength left but would spend it anyway if forced. Then, slowly, he lowered the wood to the floor. He took the rifle from his back and set it against the far wall. He removed the bow and laid it beside the rifle. Then the knife from his belt. He placed each weapon where she could see it. Only after that did he speak. "You are freezing." His voice was low, steady, and roughened by disuse, like a man who did not waste words often enough to polish them. Allara swallowed. Her throat felt scraped raw. "I will leave when the storm passes." "No one asked you to leave." She did not answer. He looked at the knife in her hand. "You can keep that," he said. It surprised her enough that her fingers loosened. He turned away from her then, not carelessly, but deliberately. He moved to the dead hearth, cleared old ash with a flat piece of wood, and began building a fire. He worked without hurry. Dry bark first, then thin sticks, then split cedar. He struck flint once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, a spark caught. Smoke rose. Then flame. The sight of it did something terrible to Allara. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She looked away, ashamed of the weakness. But the man did not comment. He only fed the fire until it became strong enough to push a little warmth into the shack. Then he reached into a small leather pouch and withdrew a strip of dried meat wrapped in cloth. He set it on the floor halfway between them. "Eat slowly," he said. Allara stared at the food. The hunger in her body was so fierce it was almost pain. But suspicion held her still. The man seemed to understand. He broke off a piece, put it in his own mouth, chewed, and swallowed. Then he stepped back. That was the first kindness, not the food, but the proof that came with it. Allara reached for the meat and ate with careful bites, though every part of her wanted to devour it. He gave her water next, in a tin cup warmed near the fire, so it would not shock her stomach. He did not ask where she had come from. He did not ask whose blood was on her sleeve. He did not ask why a white woman was half dead in an abandoned shack near an Apache trail with a knife in her hand and grief all over her face. His silence made space around her. And after Caldwell Crossing, space felt almost like mercy. "My name is Garrick Hale," he said at last. She looked up. The name was English. The man was not. He saw the question cross her face and gave no answer to it. "Not yet, Allara," she said, because her name felt dangerous. But lying felt impossible. He nodded once, as if accepting only what she had chosen to give. Outside, the wind shifted. Garrick turned his head slightly, listening. Allara heard only storm. He heard more. He went to the doorway and looked out into the white dark afternoon. His eyes dropped to the snow near the threshold, then lifted toward the canyon slope. He noticed the direction of blown powder, the broken crust where her boots had dragged, the way the horse stood with its head angled away from the wind. He read the land the way Allara read a fevered child's face. Not as magic, as knowledge, as inheritance, as survival practice so long it had become part of the body. "This shack will not hold the night," he said. The wind is turning. Snow will come through that wall before dark. Allara gave a bitter sound that might have been a laugh if she had owned enough strength to finish it. I suppose I should be grateful it waited. You need a better fire. I need a great many things. Yes, he said. You do. There was no pity in it. Somehow, that made it easier to bear. My camp is less than a mile from here. Garrick said. Dry shelter. Food. Better fire. Allara's grip tightened around the cup. The fear came back into her eyes so quickly he could almost see the shape of what had made it. He did not move closer. You can ride, he said. Or walk. I will not bind your hands. I will not take your knife. And if you tell me to stay back, I will stay back. She studied him. A stranger in a storm, an Apache man with weapons laid aside because he had understood her fear before she had spoken it. A white woman with a town behind her that would hang her if it found her. Why? She asked. Garrick looked toward the fire. Because my mother once needed help, he said, and no one gave it. He said nothing more. That single sentence carried a whole graveyard inside it. Allara stood because the alternative was dying in a shack with a warm cup in her hand. Her legs trembled so badly that for a moment she thought she would fall. Garrick saw it. He did not reach for her. He waited. I can walk, she said. I heard you. The camp lay tucked near a dry wash where cottonwood roots gripped the bank and dark stone rose behind it, breaking the wind. There was a small rounded shelter framed with bent poles and covered in hides and brush. And beside it a canvas lean-to tied low against the storm. Woven baskets sat beneath the shelter lip, protected from snow. Strips of dried mescal hung near the back. Cedar smoke moved through the cold air, sharp and clean. A horse stood beneath a juniper, watching them with patient dark eyes. Nothing about the place was decorative. Everything had a use. That was the first thing Allara noticed. Garrick brought her inside the shelter and built the fire higher. He handed her a folded blanket, then hung a hide between two poles to make a small partition. Your clothes are wet, he said. They will kill you if you keep them on. Allara stared at him. He understood immediately. Without another word, he stepped outside into the snow. I will be here, he said from beyond the entrance. Not over you. For a moment, Allara stood perfectly still. Men kept saying safe, as if it were a word they owned. Men kept offering protection with one hand while measuring the price with the other. But Garrick had left the warmth of his own shelter, so she could have privacy beside his fire. So she changed. Her fingers barely worked. The wet fabric clung to her skin. Pain came alive in her feet as blood returned to them. By the time she wrapped herself in the blanket, she was shaking so violently, her teeth clicked together. Done, she managed. Garrick came back in, with his eyes lowered first, giving her the dignity of being seen only when she was ready. He warmed smooth stones at the edge of the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and placed one near her hands, another by her feet. He moved with care, never touching her skin unless he had to. And each time his hand came close, he paused long enough for her to refuse. She did not refuse. The warmth hurt. It burned up through her palms and ankles, through bone and blood and memory. Allara clenched her jaw, but a small sound escaped her anyway. Garrick looked at her then, not with pity, with recognition. You came a long way, he said. She closed her eyes. Too far. No, he said quietly. Not if you are still here. Something in her chest shifted at that. Not healing. Not yet. But the first crack in the ice around it. Later, when the shaking eased, he gave her broth in a wooden bowl and sat across the fire with his back against a support pole. The flames moved between them. Cedar smoke clung to his hair. Snow whispered against the shelter. Allara watched him through the firelight. "You said your mother needed help," she said. His face became still. Yes. Did she get it? No. The answer was plain. But not empty. Allara knew better than to press a hand into a wound just because she recognized it. So she only nodded. "After a long while," she said. "Men came for me. I know." She looked up sharply. Garrick's eyes met hers through the smoke. There were tracks south of the shack. Many men. Horses moving hard. One man walking heavy on the left side. Angry people do not hide their trail. Her breath caught. "They will come again. Maybe. You should send me away." "No. You do not know what they say I did. I know what a hunted woman looks like," Garrick said. "And I know what guilty men look like. They do not usually freeze in old line shacks with knives too small to save them." Allara gave another broken half-laugh. But this one was softer. "You are safe here," he said. The words struck her wrong at first. She looked into the fire. Men keep saying that before they decide what safe costs. Garrick was silent. Then he rose, stepped outside again, and sat just beyond the entrance, with his back turned to her and the storm gathering around his shoulders. "From the cold," he said. "Then tonight it costs nothing." Allara stared at the place where he had been. The fire warmed her hands. The blanket warmed her skin. But that was the first moment. In all the terrible days since Caldwell Crossing, when something warmer reached the place inside her that had nearly gone dead, she did not trust him. Not yet. But for the first time since Thomas died, she let herself sleep. And outside, between her and the storm, Garrick Hale kept watch. Morning came gray and cold. But it came gently. That was the first thing Allara noticed when she opened her eyes. No shouting. No boots on floorboards. No fists against a door. Only the low crackle of fire. The soft breath of a horse outside. And the thin winter light filtering through the edge of the shelter. For a few seconds, she did not remember where she was. Her body woke before her mind did. And fear moved through her like a hand closing around the throat. Then she saw the cedar smoke curling toward the roof poles. She saw the folded hides stacked near the wall. She saw the woven basket beside the fire and Thomas's coat drying carefully on a line. Not tossed aside. Not searched. Not claimed. And beyond the entrance, seated with his back to her, was Garrick Hale. He had kept his word. He had stayed outside the warmth most of the night so she could sleep without waking to a stranger too close. Allara did not know what to do with that kind of courtesy. It made her want to thank him. And it made her want to distrust him harder. As if kindness were only another trap that had not yet sprung. When Garrick finally turned, he did not ask if she had slept well. Men who had lived close to weather and danger did not ask questions with obvious answers. Instead, he said, "You need food." Allara sat up slowly. Her whole body objected. Her feet ached. Her hands burned where feeling had returned. Her ribs complained with every breath. The world did not spin as badly as it had the night before, which she decided to count as progress. "I need a great many things," she said. Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Yes," he said, "but food first." Breakfast was coffee boiled black, thin strips of dried venison, softened in broth, and roasted pieces of mescal that tasted faintly sweet beneath the smoke. Garrick ate without ceremony, sitting across the fire, his movements efficient and quiet. Allara tried to eat slowly, the way she knew a starved body required. But hunger was a cruel teacher. Twice, she swallowed too quickly and had to stop, eyes closed, waiting for her stomach to remember what mercy felt like. Garrick noticed. He said nothing. That, too, was kindness. By the second day, she could stand without swaying. By the third, she could walk beyond the fire ring and come back without needing to sit immediately. By the fourth, she grew restless. Restlessness was a good sign in a patient. Allara knew that. It meant the body had moved from surviving to wanting. Wanting air. Wanting purpose. Wanting something to do with hands that had spent too long empty. Garrick watched her examine her medicine bag for the third time that morning. "You are counting what is already there," he said. "I am counting what is missing. Can you bring it back by counting no?" Then we walk. The canyon country beyond his winter camp was harsh, beautiful, and unforgiving. Stone rose in red and brown walls, cut by dry washes and narrow trails that appeared and vanished depending on where the eye knew to look. Snow lingered in shaded places. Sunlight touched the higher rock and turned it gold. Juniper and pinyon clung to slopes where nothing seemed able to grow, and the wind carried the clean smell of cedar, dust, and distant water. Garrick moved through it without effort. Allara did not. Loose stone betrayed her within the first quarter-mile. Her boots slid. Her breath caught. Her hand flew out toward the rock. But Garrick was already beside her. He did not grab her. He held out his hand, palm open. "May I?" he asked. The question landed between them heavier than it should have. Allara looked at his hand, then at his face. No man in Caldwell Crossing had asked before touching her when the mob came. They had grabbed, shoved, pulled, dragged. Even before that, in sick rooms and crowded houses, people had taken pieces of her without thinking. Her time, her hands, her knowledge, her sleep, her mercy. Garrick stood on a narrow canyon path, with the wind moving through his black hair, and waited for permission to place one steadying hand at her waist. "Yes," she said. His hand settled lightly against her side, firm enough to guide, loose enough to leave. "Do not fight the stone," he told her. "Feel where it wants you to put your weight." That sounds like something stone would say if it wanted to kill me. This time, the almost smile became real for half a second. Stone does not need to lie. He showed her where to step, how to keep her knees loose, how to trust the ball of her foot before committing her full weight. He did not make her feel foolish for not knowing. He taught the way he did everything else with patience that did not announce itself. They found willow near a narrow ribbon of water where the creek had not frozen. Allara stripped bark carefully with her knife. Garrick watched the hills more than he watched her, but he noticed the plants she chose and the way she handled them. "My mother used that," he said after a while. Allara looked up. "For fever, pain, fever, sometimes both. You learned from her some." He said it as if the word were a door he had opened only enough to show that a room existed beyond it. Allara did not push. On the walk back, She saw the scar. His shirt had shifted at the collar while he bent to lift a fallen branch from the path, exposing a pale line crossing the top of his shoulder and disappearing beneath the fabric. It was not new. It had healed rough. The kind of scar left by a wound that had not been tended properly or had been tended in a hurry. She said nothing then, but that evening, after the wind sharpened and the fire burned low between them, Garrick reached for a log and winced before he could hide it. Allara noticed. "You favor that shoulder," she said. "No, you do. It is old. Old wounds still become angry in cold weather." He gave her a look. "You speak to wounds as if they have opinions." "They do. For a moment." The fire did all the talking. Then he untied the top of his shirt and pulled it down from one shoulder. Reluctant, but not embarrassed, Allara shifted closer with her medicine bag. The warmth of the fire touched one side of his body, leaving the other in shadow. He was strongly built, not like men who worked for show, but like a man shaped by riding, carrying, climbing, surviving. The scar ran from the high point of his shoulder toward the middle of his back, pale and uneven against the bronze of his skin. Allara's hand hovered. "May I?" she asked. His eyes lifted to hers. Something passed between them then. A recognition, maybe, or the quiet shock of being offered the same respect one had given. "Yes," he said. She touched the edge of the scar with 2 fingers. He went still. "Does it hurt? Not there?" She understood what he meant. Some wounds stayed in the body. Others moved somewhere deeper and made a home. She worked oil into the tight muscle around the old injury. Careful and professional at first. But professional distance was difficult beside a fire. With the storm outside and his skin warm beneath her fingers and his breathing changing no matter how still he tried to remain. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Allara asked, "What happened?" Garrick looked into the fire. "Apache." The word made her hands stop. He did not look back at her. "My mother helped a white woman in childbirth. The child lived. The woman did too. For 3 days. Then fever took her. Her husband said my mother cursed her." Allara closed her eyes. She already knew where the story was going. "They came at dawn." Garrick said, 6 men. Maybe 7. I was 17. My mother told me to run to my uncle's people. I did not." His jaw moved once, as if the memory still had a taste. She ran toward the wash. One of them shot her before she reached the cottonwoods. Allara's hand remained on his shoulder. But now it was not healer's touch alone. "I am sorry," she said. Garrick did not answer right away. People say that when they do not know what else to place in the empty space. "Yes," Allara said. "But sometimes the empty space should be acknowledged." He looked at her then, for the first time. She saw not just the man who had rescued her, not just the tracker, not just the Apache stranger who moved through storm and stone as if the land spoke under his feet. She saw the boy he had been, 17 years old, standing in gun smoke, learning that truth did not always arrive before the bullet. From that night on, they shared pieces, not whole histories. Not yet. Whole histories were too heavy. But pieces. Allara told him about Thomas's hands. How he had built their kitchen table from pine boards and complained every morning that one leg was uneven, though it never was. She told him how he had laughed quietly at his own jokes before finishing them. She told him how he had said, "Sit with me," and how some part of her was still sitting beside that creek, holding a hand that had already gone cold. Garrick listened without trying to fix it. In return, he told her about his father, a white trader who had given him the name Garrick Hale because he thought an English name would make the world easier for his son. Then he left before Garrick was old enough to understand whether leaving was abandonment, cowardice, or death. Among settlers, Garrick was Apache when they wanted to fear him, and half white when they wanted to insult him. Among some Apache, he was his mother's son, which mattered most. Among others, the white blood made him a question they did not always wish to answer. "So where do you belong?" Allara asked one cold morning as they shared coffee from the same tin cup. Garrick took the cup from her hand. Their fingers touched. Neither of them moved away quickly enough. "Some days," he said, "to the horse." That surprised a laugh out of her. It came rusty, unused, and small. But it was real. His eyes lifted at the sound. And for one unguarded second, pleasure moved across his face. The laugh frightened her more than tears would have. That night, she dreamed of Caldwell Crossing. She dreamed of rope scraping over a beam. She dreamed of Jacob Pruitt's face, wet with tears and rage. She dreamed of Thomas calling her name from the creek. But when she turned, his voice came from inside the burning house. She woke, choking on a cry. Garrick was by the fire, not beside her bedroll, not reaching for her, only present. He was speaking softly in Apache, the words low and rhythmic, shaped by a language Allara did not know. She sat up, shaking. "What are you saying?" His voice stopped. After a moment, he said, "Words my mother used when fear stayed after waking. What do they mean?" He looked at the fire. "Some words are not given quickly." Allara nodded. There was a time when she might have asked again, thinking knowledge was owed because comfort had been offered. But grief had taught her boundaries. Garrick had taught her others. So she only said, "Then keep them." He looked at her. "I will." The days became a small, fragile life. Not a happy life. Not yet. But a life with warmth in it. There were mornings when she woke and did not remember to be afraid until after coffee. There were afternoons when Garrick taught her how to read rabbit tracks in powder snow and she pretended not to notice him, pretending not to enjoy teaching her. There were evenings when the silence between them no longer felt like distance, but shelter. And with each passing day, Allara became more afraid. Not of Garrick, of needing him, of the way she looked for him when he went to check the horse, of the relief that moved through her when he returned, of how his quiet had become something she rested against, of how the fire seemed warmer when he sat on the other side of it. One evening, while the sky outside burned purple over the canyon rim, she finally said what had been growing in her chest like a thorn. "I cannot do this." Garrick looked up from mending a leather strap. "Do what?" She swallowed. "Let you matter." He did not speak. Allara forced herself to continue because silence would be easier. And she no longer trusted easy things. "I had a husband. I had a home. I had people who knew my name. Then one by one, all of it was taken. And now, when you leave the shelter, I listen for your steps. When you are quiet too long, I wonder if something has happened. When you look at me, I remember I am still a woman, and not only a thing that survived." Her voice broke on the last word. And she hated that. But Garrick did not move toward her too quickly. He only set the leather strap aside. I am afraid, she said. If I let you matter, I will lose you too. The fire cracked softly outside. The horse shifted in the dark. Garrick looked at her for a long time. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that the words felt placed carefully into her hands. Losing someone does not prove loving them was wrong. Allara closed her eyes. The sentence hurt because it was true. It hurt because Thomas had been worth loving. It hurt because Garrick might be too. When she opened her eyes, Garrick was still there. Steady as stone. Patient as winter. Asking nothing from her grief that she was not ready to give. And for the first time since the frozen creek, Allara let herself imagine that the heart might be broken and still capable of choosing. Not today. Not fully. But someday, beside one fire. Under one hard sky. Two wounded people sat with the truth between them. Neither reached for it too quickly. Neither turned away. And in that restraint, something tender began. On the 7th morning, Garrick told Allara it was time to leave the winter camp. He said it while packing dried meat into a leather pouch, as if he were speaking about weather or firewood. But Allara had learned to hear the things he did not say. His hands moved with their usual steadiness, but his eyes had been turning more often toward the eastern ridge. He had walked the perimeter before sunrise. Twice. He had checked the horse's hooves, then checked them again. You saw something, Allara said. Garrick tied the pouch closed. Tracks. Her body went cold before the air could reach it. From Caldwell Crossing, maybe. 3 riders. Not close yet, but close enough. For a moment, all the warmth of the past days seemed to pull back from her. She saw again the line shack. The burning house. Jacob Pruitt's face twisted by grief. Thomas lying beside the frozen creek. She pressed her hand around the medicine bag at her hip until the leather creaked beneath her fingers. Garrick saw the fear. He did not try to soften it with a lie. My mother's people are west of here, he said, hidden beyond a canyon basin. They will not open their arms just because I bring you, but they will hear you before deciding. Allara looked toward the shelter where cedar smoke still drifted beneath the poles. A small life had begun there. A fragile one. It frightened her how quickly she had come to depend on it. What will they ask me? The truth. She gave a tired breath. That is all I have left. The journey took most of the day. They moved through country that seemed designed to keep secrets. The trail narrowed between walls of stone, then vanished beneath shelves of rock and reappeared near a wash lined with cottonwood and willow. Garrick led the horse more often than he rode. He stopped when the wind shifted. He touched stone still warm from yesterday's sun. He listened when the birds went quiet and waited until they began again. Allara watched him and understood something she had only partly understood before. His people did not know the land because they loved it in pretty words. They knew it because the land had to be known. Water meant life. Tracks meant warning. Wind carried scent. Sound. Weather. Danger. A canyon could shelter you or trap you. A plant could feed, heal, poison, or mark where water had run beneath the surface. Knowledge here was not decoration. It was survival passed from hand to hand, season to season, elder to child. Late in the afternoon, they came through a narrow split in the rocks, and the basin opened below them. Allara stopped without meaning to. The camp was smaller than she expected and more alive. Rounded shelters stood low against the weather, framed with poles and covered in brush. Hides, and canvas where canvas could be had. Smoke lifted from several fires. Horses moved inside a rope line near the far cottonwoods. A woman knelt over a pot, stirring something thick and fragrant. Two children carried water together, arguing in whispers over who had spilled more. An old man repaired a bridle with slow, precise hands. Strips of dried plants hung in the shade beside a woven burden basket. Dogs slept near the ashes until one raised its head and gave one short warning bark. No one rushed forward. No one smiled for her benefit. They looked at Garrick first, then at Allara. Caution moved through the camp like wind through grass. Garrick did not apologize for it. "My mother's people," he said. Allara nodded. A woman came toward them from the largest shelter near the center fire. She was older, though not fragile. Her hair was streaked with silver and tied back simply. Her face was lined by weather, grief, a mower, and the hard labor of remaining alive in a world that had made too many promises with rifles behind its back. Garrick lowered his head slightly. "Nora." The woman's eyes moved over him with feeling she did not waste by showing too much of it. "You look thin," she said. "I have been eating." "Then you have been eating badly." His mouth almost moved. Then Nora Red Willow turned to Allara. Her gaze was direct, not cruel, but sharp enough to cut away any performance a person might bring with them. "You are the woman they are hunting." Allara swallowed. "Yes. You brought trouble behind you." "Yes. Did you come here to hide?" Nora asked. "Or to become useful?" The question struck harder than Allara expected. Not because it was unkind, because it was fair. She looked at the camp around her. The children watching from behind their mother's skirt. The men near the horses pretending not to listen. The women who had not stopped working but had slowed just enough to hear. Garrick standing a few feet away, not speaking for her. Allara lifted her chin. "I came here to live," she said. "I do not yet know if I remember how." For a long moment, Nora studied her. Then the old woman nodded once, honest enough to begin. That was all the welcome Allara received. And somehow, it felt more solid than kindness spoken too quickly. They gave her a place near one of the smaller fires. A bowl of stew made with dried meat, roots, and roasted mescal, and water in a clay cup. No one asked for her full story that night, but everyone seemed to know pieces of it by morning. As small camps always knew things, not through gossip exactly, but through the movement of eyes, the careful placement of questions. The way women speak while grinding food, and men listen, while pretending the bridle in their hands, has become very interesting. Allara noticed the life of the camp, not the way outsiders might notice it, as if each object existed to prove something about a people. She noticed it as a woman who had run a household and tended sick rooms. She noticed what was repaired and what was worn past repair. She noticed which child coughed in the cold air. She noticed one young mother shifting her baby from side to side to hide her own exhaustion. She noticed an older man hiding pain in his knuckles by working more slowly when no one looked. The camp was not a painting. It was not a legend. It was ordinary life under pressure. There was laughter here, dry and quick. There was suspicion. There was hunger carefully managed. There was grief that had become part of the daily work. There were young men who watched Allara as if a white woman brought more danger than help, and older women who watched her hands to see whether she knew anything worth knowing. On the second day, a boy named Taza began coughing badly. He was 8 or 9. thin from winter, with bright eyes made dull by fever. His mother had kept him near the fire through the night, but by morning his breathing had grown wet and tight. Nora came to Allara without ceremony. "You know, chest sickness, yes. Then come." Inside the shelter, Allara knelt beside the boy, but did not touch him at once. She looked first at his mother. "What have you given him?" The woman glanced at Nora, then answered in careful English. "Steam with cedar. Warm drink. A little willow." Allara nodded. "May I see how he breathes?" Permission passed from mother to Nora, then back to Allara with a small nod. Only then did Allara place her hand near the boy's ribs. Feel the heat in his skin. Listen to the catch and rattle in his chest. She asked about the color of his phlegm, how long he had coughed, whether the fever rose at night, whether he had eaten. Nora watched her hands. "You listen before touching," the old woman said at last. "That is good. Too many white healers touch first and listen after." Allara did not defend herself. "I have made that mistake." Nora's eyes remained on the boy. "Then make fewer." Together, they worked. Nora brought dried mullein and a bitter root Allara did not recognize. Allara asked its use before offering any suggestion. She added what willow bark she had, not as a replacement, but as a companion. They made steam and broth. They propped the boy so his lungs could work with less struggle. Allara sat with him while his mother rested for the first time in 2 days. By evening, Taza's breathing eased, not healed, but turned toward healing. That mattered. After that, the camp changed slightly around Allara. Not warmly, not completely, but enough. A woman brought her a strip of dried meat without making a speech of it. A child sat close enough to stare at her medicine bag. The old man with painful knuckles allowed her to rub warmed oil into his hands while pretending he had agreed only to stop Nora from scolding him. And Garrick watched all of this from the edges. He did not look proud. Pride would have been too simple. He looked relieved in a way that made Allara's chest ache. That night, as the fires burned low and the canyon held the cold like a bowl, a rider came in hard from the east. The camp changed before Allara understood why. Men stood. Dogs rose. Women pulled children closer without appearing afraid. Garrick moved from shadow to firelight with one smooth motion, his hand near the knife at his belt. The rider was Apache. Young, breathless, and mud-spattered. He spoke quickly to Nora first, then to Garrick. Allara caught only a few English words. Caldwell Crossing. Children. Sick. More dead. Her heart began to pound. Garrick turned to her, and his face told her enough. What she asked. He hesitated. Nora answered instead. The town south of here is still losing children. Adults now too. For a moment, Allara could not move. The camp sounds pulled away from her. The fire. The horse. The rider's breathing. All of it faded beneath the sudden hard clarity forming in her mind. Still losing children. Adults now too. She had been gone for weeks. If she had poisoned them, if her medicines had done it, if her presence had carried the sickness from house to house, then the deaths should have slowed after she fled. They had not. Allara stood slowly. What else, she asked? Tell me everything. The rider did not know much. Only rumors carried north through traders and frightened ranch hands. Fever. Stomach pain. Weakness. Some complained of a strange taste in the mouth. Several families said the creek water had looked cloudy after rain. Livestock had refused it near the lower bend. Allara felt each detail fall into place like stones in a grave. The strange metallic taste, the stomach pain, the fever that did not behave like fever. Children first. Because children were smaller. Adults later. Because poison needed time. She turned to Garrick. The water. His eyes narrowed. What water? The creek in Caldwell Crossing. Something is in it. Nora's face became still. Garrick looked toward the eastern dark. There is a mine upstream, he said. New. White men with guards. They drove 2 hunters away from that water last moon. A mine, Allara repeated. Silver, they say. Maybe copper. Mendie and wash rock. The runoff goes somewhere. The creek, Allara said. The truth was so clear now it felt almost cruel. All those children, all those mothers, all those graves. And all the while, the source had been running right through the town in plain sight. Allara put a hand over her mouth. Not to cry, to hold back the sound rising from somewhere deeper than tears. Jacob Pruitt's son had not died from her medicine. Maisie Boone had not died from witchcraft. Thomas had not died because Allara had done wrong. The children had been poisoned by water their own town trusted, and the town had chosen a woman to burn because water could not be hanged. Later, when the camp settled into uneasy silence, Garrick found Allara near the edge of the basin. You are thinking of going back, he said. She did not look at him. Yes. No. The word was quiet, but hard. She turned. No, they will kill you before they listen. They are still drinking that water. You owe them nothing. I know. Then why go back? Because children are still drinking that water. They tried to hang you. And they were wrong. If I let them stay wrong, more people die. His jaw tightened. You think truth will save you? No, she said. But running will not save who I am. The words stood between them, sharp and living. Garrick looked away first, toward the dark rim of the canyon. In the firelight, Allara could see the muscle working in his cheek. The anger in him, not at her, but at every road that had led them to this choice. My mother ran, he said. They shot her anyway. I am not your mother. No, he said. You are the woman standing in front of me asking me to watch you walk toward men with rope. She softened then, but not enough to surrender the truth. I am asking you to understand why I must. He gave a bitter breath. I understand too well. He left her there before either of them could say something meant to wound. That night, sleep did not come. Allara sat outside the shelter, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars burn over the canyon. The camp behind her was quiet except for the occasional shift of a horse, a low murmur from a sleeping child, the pop of a dying coal. She heard Garrick before she saw him. He sat beside her without apology and without asking forgiveness too quickly. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. I am afraid. Allara turned to him. The words seemed to cost him more than any confession he had made before. He looked out over the dark basin. I have known anger. I have known hunger. I have known soldiers, bounty men, winter, and blood. His voice lowered. But I do not know what to do with being afraid for one woman. Allara's throat tightened. There it was. Not a declaration wrapped in pretty words. Something more dangerous. Something honest. She reached across the cold space between them and took his hand. This time, not because she was falling, not because she needed help over loose stone, because she chose to. His fingers closed around hers slowly, as if he were giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. For a long time, they sat that way beneath the hard western stars. Two wounded people holding one another at the edge of a decision that might cost them both. Behind them, the Apache camp slept. Before them, Caldwell Crossing waited with poisoned water. Buried children, and men who had mistaken grief for justice. By morning, Allara knew she would go back, and Garrick knew he would go with her. They left before sunrise. Not because the morning promised safety. It did not. The sky was low and bruised, heavy with rain that had not yet begun to fall. The air smelled of wet stone, cold ash, and something metallic blowing down from the east. Horses stamped softly near the edge of the Apache camp, while Nora Red Willow stood beside the fire with her blanket pulled around her shoulders. Watching Allara, the way older women watch younger ones when they know advice has already become useless, Garrick checked the cinch on his horse. Ali, Nora's nephew, did the same beside him. Two Apache riders waited behind them. Quiet men, with weathered faces and eyes that moved constantly over ridge, wash, and shadow. They were not going to Caldwell Crossing to fight a white town's battle. They were going because poisoned water did not stop at the edge of one people's grief. Before Allara mounted, Nora took her by the wrist. Not gently, firmly. "You want truth?" Nora said. "Yes." "Then do not dress it in soft words to make frightened men comfortable." Allara looked into the old woman's face. "I won't." Nora's gaze moved to Garrick, then back again. "And do not mistake being willing to die for being ready to live." The words followed Allara long after the camp disappeared behind stone and juniper. They rode south through country that seemed to hold its breath. Garrick did not ride ahead of her as if he owned the path. He rode slightly beside her, close enough to reach her if the horse stumbled, far enough to let her hold her own reins. More than once, Allara felt his eyes on her. But each time she looked, he was watching the trail, the ridge, the dark line of clouds crawling toward them. By midday, the rain began. Not a clean rain, a hard, flat, punishing rain that struck the dust and turned it into red mud, slid down collars, soaked blankets, and filled hoofprints almost as soon as they were made. The canyon walls darkened. The washes began to whisper with thin threads of moving water. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled over the high country like a wagon crossing a wooden bridge. No one complained. By late afternoon, Eli found the mob's trail. 20 men. Maybe more. Horses moving badly. Boots slipping in mud. One wagon. Light, but fast. Likely carrying supplies, or rope, or both. They were not trying to hide. Anger rarely does. It believes its own noise is righteousness. Garrick crouched near the tracks, rain running from the brim of his hat. "They are ahead of where we thought," he said. Allara looked toward the narrowing canyon pass. How far? Less than 2 miles. Her mouth went dry. She had imagined the confrontation 100 times since deciding to return. In every imagining, she had been calm, clear, strong. The truth had stood in her like a lantern. Now that the moment had come, She could feel her heart beating in her throat. Garrick rose and looked at her. "We can still turn west." "No." The answer came too quickly to be bravery. It was something simpler. A woman standing at the last door left to her, and knowing she had already chosen what waited on the other side. Garrick nodded once. Not approval. Acceptance. They found the clearing where the canyon widened around an old oak whose roots had lifted the ground into a natural rise. Rain dripped from its bare branches. Mud gathered between the roots. Beyond it, the trail ran south toward Caldwell Crossing and north toward the Apache Basin. Allara knew at once this was where it would happen. Garrick knew it too. "Stand there," he said, looking at the raised roots. "Let them see you before they decide they have already caught you." She looked at him. "And you beside you. Not in front of me." His eyes held hers. "No." That answer steadied her more than any promise could have. The mob came through the rain 10 minutes later. First, the horses. Then the men walking behind them with rifles wrapped in oilcloth and rope hanging from a saddle horn. 23 in all. Allara counted automatically because numbers gave shape to fear. Jacob Pruitt rode near the front. Rain had flattened his hair to his skull and streaked mud up one side of his coat. He looked thinner than when she had last seen him. But harder, too. As if grief had burned everything soft out of him and left only iron. Earl Dawson was there. 2 of the Frey brothers. Men from the mill. Men from church. Men who had eaten at tables where Allara had once been thanked for saving a child's breath. They saw her standing beneath the oak. And the whole group slowed. For one long moment. There was only rain. Then Jacob Pruitt spoke. "Well," he said, his voice rough and thick. "The witch came back." The word moved through the clearing. Ugly and familiar. Garrick did not move. Allara felt him beside her. Steady as a post set deep in stone. Eli and the 2 riders had spread to the edges. Not threatening. Not hidden. Simply placed where foolish men would have to notice them. Allara lifted her voice. "I came back because your children are still dying." The words struck harder than a gunshot. Several men looked at one another. Jacob's face tightened. "You do not get to speak of our children." "Yes." Allara said. "I do. I held them while they burned with fever. I listened to their lungs. I watched their mothers pray over bedsheets soaked through with sweat. I buried my own husband because your grief needed someone to chase. So yes, Jacob, I will speak of your children." His hand moved near his rifle. Garrick's body changed beside her. Almost imperceptibly. Allara lifted one hand slightly. "Not yet." She turned her eyes to the crowd. "You said I poisoned them. You said my medicines killed them. You said my presence brought death into Caldwell Crossing." Rain ran down her face. But she did not wipe it away. "Then tell me this. If I was the poison, why did the dying continue after I left?" No one answered. The question sat in the clearing like a body no one wanted to claim. Allara pressed on. "I have been gone for weeks. My medicines are gone. My hands are gone. My house is ash. And still children died." A woman's voice broke from the back of the group. "My Clara died 9 days after you ran." Allara found her in the rain. A young mother. No older than 25. Standing beside a wagon with both hands wrapped around a shawl. Her face was hollow with the special grief of mothers who still wake reaching for a child no longer there. Alara's voice softened, but did not weaken. "I am sorry." The woman's lips trembled. She was 4. I know. Jacob snapped. You think grief makes us fools? No. Allara said, I think grief made you afraid. And fear made it easier to hate a woman than question the water your whole town drinks. At that, the clearing changed. Just slightly. A shift of eyes. A turn of shoulders. A thought entering men who did not want it. Allara reached into her medicine bag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside were stained strips of linen she had used days before to test water taken from a downstream seep near the mine road, and a jar of creek water Eli had gathered from a tributary feeding Caldwell Crossing. She held it up. Fever, stomach pain, weakness, a metallic taste in the mouth. Livestock refusing the lower creek. Cloudy water after rain. Children sick first because their bodies are smaller. Adults later because poison takes time. Earl Dawson spat into the mud. You expect us to believe you over our own eyes? No. Allara said, I expect you to use them. She pointed south. Test the barrels in Caldwell Crossing. Ask why the creek runs cloudy after storms. Ask why the mining men guard the upstream water. Ask why the dead livestock were dragged away before anyone could count them. Jacob's expression changed so quickly, Allara almost missed it. But Garrick did not. Neither did Eli. The young mother saw it too. She turned toward Jacob. What dead livestock? Jacob's jaw clenched. No one is talking about cattle. You heard her. The woman said. What dead livestock? Earl Dawson frowned now. Jacob Rain struck Jacob's hat brim and fell in steady lines before his face. It was nothing, he said. Allara's heart slowed. There it was. The first crack. What was nothing? She asked. Jacob looked at her with hatred. But beneath it was panic. A few animals died near the lower bend. That happens. Winter is hard. Water goes foul sometimes. Did the mine pay you? Allara asked. The words landed clean. The men around Jacob stilled. He took one step forward in the mud. You watch your mouth. Did they pay you to keep men from asking questions they paid the town? No. Allara said. They paid you. His face reddened. For road work. For the mill. For supplies. That mine brought money when this town was starving. And when the creek changed, we did not know. Allara's voice lowered. But you saw. Jacob's eyes shone now. Not with tears. Not yet. But with something fighting hard not to become them. You think I knew children would die. I think you knew something was wrong. I think you told yourself it could not be as bad as it looked. I think when your own son died, you needed the cause to have a face. So you chose mine. His rifle came up. It happened so fast, several men shouted at once. Garrick moved. Allara stopped him with one hand against his chest. He froze. Every line of him ready to break through that touch. If the rifle shifted 1 inch more, but he did not step in front of her. Allara faced Jacob herself. Rain ran between them. The barrel of the rifle trembled. You wanted me to be the monster, she said. Because if I was the monster, then you were only a grieving father. But grief does not wash blood from a man's hands. Jacob's face broke. Not dramatically. Not with a cry. Something simply went out of him. The rifle lowered a few inches. His mouth opened. But no words came. And in that fragile second, one of the younger men near the wagon panicked. Maybe he thought Jacob had been threatened. Maybe he saw an Apache rider move at the edge of his vision. Maybe fear found his trigger finger before sense could reach it. The shot cracked across the clearing. Garrick seized Allara and pulled her down behind the oak roots as mud burst near her shoulder. A second later, he sucked in a breath through his teeth. Allara saw the blood before he could hide it, dark against his side. "No," she said. "It is a graze. Do not." He tried to shift as if the wound were beneath discussion. "It is not deep." Allara pressed both hands to the blood, her fingers already searching, assessing, working. The old healer in her rose through the fear because that was what it had always done. But this time her hands shook. Garrick looked down at them. "Allara, do not do that. What, do not bleed in front of me and pretend I should not be afraid." His face changed. The rain softened the blood along his shirt, spreading it beneath her palms. Around them, voices shouted. Eli and the riders had drawn weapons but had not fired. Several men in the mob had thrown themselves backward. The young man who shot stood pale and shaking. His rifle pointed at the ground now, as if he had no memory of raising it. Garrick's breath came hard, but his eyes stayed on Allara. "I am not leaving you," he said. She pressed cloth to the wound. "You do not get to promise that." "No," he said, "but I can mean it while I am here." For one terrible second, the clearing disappeared. There was no mob, no rain, no poisoned creek, no dead children. Only this man beneath her hands and the impossible tenderness of wanting him alive. Then Jacob spoke. "Enough." His voice was broken, but it carried. He turned toward the young man who had fired. "Put it down." The man obeyed. Jacob looked at the others. "All of you. Put them down." One by one. Rifles lowered, not all from shame. Some from confusion, some from fear, some because truth, once spoken plainly enough, becomes difficult to shoot without knowing exactly what kind of coward you are. The young mother stepped forward through the mud, her face pale and wet. "What do we do?" she asked Allara. It was not forgiveness. It was need. And need was something Allara understood. She rose slowly from beside Garrick, keeping one hand pressed to his bandage until Eli took her place. Garrick caught her wrist briefly before she stood fully. His fingers were warm despite the rain. Then he let go. Allara turned to the crowd that had once burned her home. "You stopped drinking from the creek," she said. "Today. No cooking, no washing wounds, no watering children. You boil what stored water you have, though boiling may not remove what the mine has put in it. You send riders north and shut the mine road. You dig above the contamination line, upstream from the waste. And you keep men posted there until every barrel in town is emptied and every child is checked." Earl Dawson stared at the mud. One of the Frey brothers removed his hat. Jacob did not look at her. Allara continued, "You will bring me the sick if you want them treated. But understand this, I am not coming back to be your healer because you finally believe me. I am telling you what must be done because children should not pay for the sins of frightened adults." The young mother began to cry without sound. No one asked Allara for forgiveness. Perhaps they understood, at last, that forgiveness was not another thing they could demand from her hands. The rain kept falling. It washed mud from boots and blood from roots. But it did not wash away what had happened there. Nothing could. Not the truth. Not the lowered rifles. Not Jacob Pruitt standing hollow in the rain with the knowledge of what his grief had helped destroy. Allara looked once toward Caldwell Crossing. The town was beyond the trees. hidden by weather and distance. But she could almost smell the smoke of her burned house. She could almost hear Thomas's voice at the frozen creek. "Sit with me." For a long moment, she did. She sat with the grief, with the anger, with the truth. Then she turned back to Garrick. He was watching her, pale but steady. One hand pressed against the bandage at his side. She went to him, not running, not collapsing, walking, as a woman who had finally stopped fleeing. And when she knelt beside him in the mud, he gave her that small, almost smile she had come to know so well. "You made them listen," he said. Allara looked at the crowd, at the lowered weapons, at the woman weeping for Clara, at Jacob Pruitt with his rifle hanging useless in his hand. "No," she said. "The dead did." Then she took Garrick's hand, and for the first time since Caldwell Crossing had named her monster. Allara Voss was not asking anyone to believe she was innocent. She knew. That was enough. Weeks passed before Allara Voss returned to the place where she had buried her husband. By then, Caldwell Crossing was no longer the same town. The mine road had been closed. The creek had been marked with rough wooden signs warning families not to drink from it. Men who once carried rope now carried shovels, digging for clean water above the poisoned line. Mothers boiled what little they trusted. Children were watched with frightened eyes, not because anyone blamed a healer now, but because fear had finally learned the right direction to look. Some townspeople came to Allara. Not all. Some guilt is too heavy for weak people to carry in daylight. But a few came. Mrs. Dawson stood before her with shaking hands and said she had been wrong. One of the Frey brothers removed his hat and could not find words at all. The young mother who had lost Clara only touched Allara's sleeve and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." Allara accepted their words, but she did not return to live among them. A burned house cannot become a home again just because the ashes are sorry. So when the work was done, when the sick had been checked, when the town had enough truth to survive what it had done, Allara walked north to the frozen creek. Garrick came with her. But he did not stand beside the grave. He waited beneath the trees, far enough to give her privacy, close enough that she did not feel abandoned. Thomas's grave was simple. Snow had softened the edges of the stones she had placed there with her numb hands. The wooden marker leaned slightly from the weather. Allara knelt before it. For a long while, she said nothing. Then, softly, she spoke. "I survived." The words broke something open in her chest. "I did not know if I wanted to. Not after you. Not after the house. Not after they made my name into something ugly." She touched the cold marker. "I loved you, Thomas. I still do. I think some part of me always will." The wind moved through the trees, but I thought loving you meant keeping grief close enough to hurt every day. I thought if I healed, it meant leaving you behind. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. "I know better now. Love is not proven by refusing to live." She stayed until the sun lowered behind the ridge and the cold began reaching through her coat. Then Allara rose. When she walked back, Garrick was waiting where she had left him. He did not ask what she had said. He did not need to own that part of her. He only looked at her face and understood that something had changed. "Ready?" he asked. Allara looked once toward the south, where Caldwell Crossing sat beyond the trees with its poisoned creek. Its shame. Its dead. And its chance to become better than what it had been. Then she looked north, toward the canyon country, toward Nora's fire, toward the Apache camp where children still needed tending, where roots and herbs still waited to be learned, where life would not be easy, but it would be chosen. Garrick offered his hand. This time, Allara took it without hesitation. She did not know what the future would ask of them. She did not know if love between a white healer and an Apache man could survive a world so eager to divide them. She did not know how many wounds still waited beneath her skin. But she knew this. She was no longer running. Allara Voss never became the woman Caldwell Crossing accused her of being. She did not become bitter enough to stop healing. She did not become afraid enough to stop loving. And she did not mistake survival for the absence of pain. Sometimes, life takes everything familiar from a woman. Her home, her name, her safety, the person she thought would walk beside her until the end. But sometimes, after the fire and the snow and the long road through grief, life gives her something unexpected. Not the life she lost, not the woman she used to be. Something harder, something truer, a life she chooses with open eyes. And maybe that is the lesson. The heart does not heal because the past becomes gentle. It heals because one day, even with the scars still there, we decide we are worthy of warmth again. A woman does not become strong because she never breaks. She becomes strong when she refuses to let betrayal decide who she will become. And love, when it is real, does not rescue her from her pain. It stands beside her while she finds the courage to live beyond it. My friends, if this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments what parts stayed with you the most. Are you listening from Texas, Arizona, California, Oklahoma, or somewhere far beyond the old frontier trails? Drop your city and state below. I always love seeing how far the Eagle Eye Apache family reaches, and if you believe stories like this still matter, stories of courage, love, loss, and the people history almost forgot. Please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs a little strength today. And subscribe to Eagle Eye Apache for more powerful stories from the heart of the American West. Until next time, my friends, walk with courage, remember the truth, and never let the world's cruelty decide the shape of your heart.